Hi, this is Josh from Grapplezilla, and today we're going to talk about wrestling's pressure and the wrestling pocket for BJJ. On a global scale, there are hundreds of grappling and wrestling styles practiced around the world. Some are popular styles like BJJ, judo, sambo, freestyle wrestling, catch wrestling, etc. And some are not as popular, such as regional cultural styles such as Romanian Tranta, Moldovan Tranta, Chidaoba, Mongolian Boch, Turkish oil wrestling, Korean Sirum, everything. Now, each style has attributes that depend on the rules of the style. Some styles have specific grips, some styles have specific points allotted for certain techniques, and some styles have certain band positions, etc. Now, each of these rules will develop an attribute for that grappling style, right? And these attributes can add a new dynamic to grappling athletes' skills when they're cross-trained, and by adding these grappling styles into your game, you'll not only get technical advantages, you're going to get physical and stylistic attributes that can add on top of, for example, your Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, in recent years, as we've seen, as according to last Abu Dhabi for sure, the one grappling style that's been really beneficial to add to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and that many Jiu-Jitsu schools are adding is wrestling, be it freestyle, it could be Greco-Roman wrestling or folk style wrestling. Now, the reason for such a successful marriage of wrestling and BJJ is often misunderstood, as many people think it's just to learn takedowns, but those who truly understand wrestling and truly add wrestling to the BJJ are gaining an immense advantage, as they're not only adding wrestling techniques, but the physical and tactical attributes of wrestling as well, okay? And these attributes, as we said, are the wrestling pressure and the use of the wrestling pocket, which I'm going to explain right now. What is wrestling pressure? Okay, now wrestling pressure can simply be explained to the non-wrestler as using distance, using movement, using contact, proper limb placement, distraction, scrambling for position, proper weight distribution, and controlling hip level. And all of these are used together when in contact with an opponent. Okay, that's wrestling pressure. And this wrestling pressure is by far the most overlooked positive aspect of adding wrestling to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But it's the absolute most important aspect of adding wrestling to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. Now, it can be said that wrestling pressure was heavily influenced by two specific rules within the sport of wrestling itself. Now, the first rule is the passivity rule, or passivity call, which is where wrestlers are punished for being passive in a match. Now, this passivity rule it really paves the way for action within a match. And in BJJ, it's very common to see two Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitors standing in front of each other at the beginning of combat, like the average BJJ practitioner, and they're almost afraid to confront each other, afraid to go for the takedown. Now, for sure, a lot of it has to do with BJJ's rules, and the person can be submitted or jump guard should they make a mistake, and I get that. But once again, we're seeing wrestling and those jiu-jiteros using wrestling dominating, so we're going to stick with that, okay? Now, the second rule that we need to talk about is the push-out rule in wrestling, where if I push an opponent out from the fight area or the ring or the circle of wrestling, I'll get awarded a point. Or if I was charged with passivity, within 30 seconds, I'll be, the passivity call be canceled, okay? And then sometimes in the rules, they'll be given a point as well. In wrestling, the rules change, not daily, but all the time. So it's always, it's very common for us to say, what are the rules now? What's this new rule? So, okay. Now, for example, we look at MMA, for example, we see wrestlers constantly controlling where the fight goes. And a lot of this has to do with those two rules that I just spoke about within wrestling, because they build the attribute of pressure, knowing how to use pressure all the time on the opponent at all times. Okay, just to give you an example. Now, actually, wrestling pressure can even be explained more thoroughly as we see it within clinch fighting, as the constant pulling and pushing motions, moving to the side, changing angles, changing strong effective grips, snapping the head down while moving in changing directions for attack, etc. We see it a lot in the chest-to-chest position, in the over-under. We see it in hip contact and weight distribution in the arm drag. That's a big one. We see it in head pressure on the duck under when you're taking the back, that's pressure. And we see it in the constant attack and wrestlers basically not being afraid to make them, I won't say mistake, but knowing that if they make a mistake, they have chain wrestling and the scramble in order to get out of a bad position, okay? And that's basically what is wrestling pressure, in my opinion. Now, what is the wrestling pocket? Now, the wrestling pocket is a very interesting term, okay? It's similar to like a boxer's pocket or a judoka's pocket, or the pocket that we always hear of in the UFC when Joe Rogan says, he's in the pocket, you see? So a wrestler also has a pocket, but what is the wrestler's pocket? The wrestling pocket is absolutely related to pressure, wrestling pressure, but with a constant understanding of your body placement and weight distribution in contrast to body contact with your opponent, okay? Now, it sounds confusing, doesn't it? Okay, so, well, it really isn't confusing once you understand wrestling pressure, okay? So, to understand the wrestling pocket, a good example, let's talk about the arm drag, okay? Because a lot of jiu-jitsu know the arm drag. It's a very common, very effective way of getting a takedown, etc. Now let's take a no-gi BJJ practitioner. Generally, they have wonderful setup and execution of the arm drag until a certain point where they would try to grab the opponent's far hip and catch the back and standing up, okay? This isn't to say that they're not successful in doing it, because they are. But the difference is, if you look at a wrestler doing an arm drag, they're going to always use that wrestler's pocket properly. And generally their hip position is always going to be, in comparison to a jiu-jitsu, it's going to be always in a perfect position. And they're always going to be making the opponent carry their weight, okay? And that's a huge difference. And you see it when jiu-jiteros, like BJJ practitioners, have a wrestler come to their club and say, man, wrestling this guy, he's so strong. It's very hard. I get so tired. A lot of it, of course, wrestlers are strong, but a lot of it isn't the fact that wrestlers are so strong. It's the fact that he's using pressure all the time. And for example, on that arm drag we just spoke about, he's not just going to the arm drag to go to a single or back. He's making sure you're always feeling his weight. You're always feeling the pressure of him. There's no easy breaks, So that's a very good example of it, Another proper example, if you watch any Greco-Roman wrestling or freestyle wrestling arm drag in competition, you're always going to see like proper hip height and placement, and it's always guaranteeing this weight distribution. And this creates a lot of wrestling pressure that we're talking about. Now, basically the wrestling pocket is when you have all the elements of a technique, proper distance, weight distribution, wrestling pressure, timing, and hip placement, and these are in your favor together to maximize the technique's effectiveness. That's the wrestling pocket. Now, does this mean that all BJJ competitors perform poor arm drags? No, not at all. In fact, you have some world-class arm drags done by BJJ guys, such as Marcelo Garcia. I mean, awesome arm drag. Marcus Buchecha, Almeida, Cyborg, Roberto Bro, and Gary Tonin. They're all using arm drags at even that of like I would say like an international level wrestler. Good timing, they're always using pressure, etc. They're fast and they get to their goal fast. And this has to be stated as like, I'm not trying to downplay Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or the takedowns of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm trying to let you know and emphasize the development of wrestling pressure and understanding the wrestler's pocket in order to skyrocket grapplers' wrestling abilities, and thus overall BJJ guys or girls' overall grappling game, okay? Now, how to train wrestling pressure? It's a simple question with a simple response. You need to wrestle under the rule set of wrestling to develop those attributes. Okay, not exactly what we wanted to hear, I'm sure, but there's some logic to that. Now, it's not to say that you need to only train under wrestling's rule set, because you still have your primary purpose for learning wrestling. It's not to wrestle, it's to improve your BJJ game, most likely your no-gi game, although gi will help as well. You may be a BJJ athlete getting ready for a local grappling tournament and need to develop aggressiveness and takedowns. And you might be a great guard player with great guard submissions. And of course, you want to develop your ability with wrestling to get used to people of wrestling, right? But wrestling in this case will always be your secondary ability, and your primary ability will be your jiu-jitsu. And I'm not here to say like wrestling is the all-knowing art that you have that'll defeat anyone. I'm saying if you add it to your jiu-jitsu and you add it properly, the keywords properly, it's going to pay off. Now, in the case of wrestling's rule set, when training wrestling, it'll develop a lot of attributes that are still great to have. You should train with passivity calls, push-outs, scrambling for top position and fighting off the pin. Yes, fighting off the pin. And these are all going to develop your wrestling aggression, ability to scramble, your non-stop attacking, not being afraid to attack, that we see a lot of the jiu-jiteros who are winning major grappling competitions like IBJJF, EBI, ADCC, NAGA. They all have those type of attributes at the top levels. And if you want to develop them, wrestling will definitely help you develop those. The trick is to keep focused on the rule set you're training when you're talking about wrestling attribution development, without developing bad habits, of course, because wrestling can develop bad habits. So you have to know how to do it properly. And you're asking if it can be done. Of course it can. It's a lot of people say it can't be done, etc. But it is. I mean, take Buchecha, for example. He won the Abu Dhabi. He's multiple-time IBJJF champion, perhaps the best grappler of all time. Arguably, you could say other people, Roger, Gordon, etc. You name it. But Buchecha's in the argument there, right? Buchecha's been training wrestling for many years, and he shows it in his aggressiveness of takedown game, his outstanding scrambling ability. He always has this constant wrestling pressure. I'm not saying it's not from jiu-jitsu, but wrestling's definitely adding on that. And he uses the wrestling pocket proper as well. The pocket mixed with his aggressiveness and pressure, he is a force to reckon with in matches, and you see it. But the most impressive element of Buchecha is truly the fact that he's become a great wrestler with no carryover bad habits that could impact his jiu-jitsu and submission wrestling game. So he did it properly, and in the current, like especially after the 2022 Abu Dhabi, we're starting to see a lot of BJJ schools adding wrestling, and those who are adding wrestling and doing it properly are dominating for the most part, and we saw it once again. You saw it during this Abu Dhabi. It was phenomenal, and you see it with John Donner. He's training wrestling, and a lot of these guys are doing it. Okay, now in conclusion, wrestling pressure and the use of the wrestling pocket are for sure the most underlooked and most important factor when you're talking about adding wrestling into your BJJ and grappling game. It's not easy to develop, okay? No one's saying it's easy, and it does take time. But once you understand wrestling pressure and the use of the wrestling pocket, your grappling and your BJJ abilities are only going to get much better, and you're going to become more dangerous. And should you ever go to MMA, it only is going to help you as well. There's no doubt. And we see this in many top IBJJF, ADCC, and MMA athletes, as they're dedicating a large part of their training to wrestling, and they're properly winning. Now, at the end of the day, grappling styles are all just a type of wrestling, okay? We all love to say names, and there's this marketing. Is it Gracie Jiu-Jitsu? No, it's Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu. No, it's 10th Planet Jiu-Jitsu. it's Kodokan Judo. Yes, but they're all rule sets or philosophies and how they get it. But in a way, it's a wrestling. Like you grab and you try to manipulate the opponent into a position, right? So it's a type of wrestling. And each type of these wrestlings, because of their philosophies and their rule set, all develop different attributes. And there might be very small differences in attributes, but they do. Now, there is no doubt that of all these styles currently, wrestling, and when speaking of wrestling, specifically the Olympic wrestling styles as freestyle and Greco-Roman, as well as collegiate folk style wrestling, which is common in the United States, we see that they're very specific attributes that not only make a difference in a grappling athlete's ability, but also in their confidence when they're properly added. That's the last thing we should talk about. All this is going to get you confident, in the scramble, when you're standing up, defending the takedown, attacking, and scoring those points that you need, or getting into the position you need to attack. Now, hopefully you add wrestling to your BJJ properly, the keywords properly, and let's get the attributes that add another dimension to your BJJ game. So until then, add wrestling, train jiu-jitsu, and just train. Have a good day.